Zayn has been thinking about money seriously since he was 24 years old. Not obsessively, not in the way that replaces having a life, but consistently, deliberately, with the kind of quiet attention that most people reserve for things that feel more immediately urgent. He is 39 now, and 3 weeks ago, on an unremarkable Wednesday morning before his first coffee, he opened his brokerage app and saw a number he had been moving toward for 15 years. $1,012,000. He sat with it for about 40 seconds. Then he closed the app, made his coffee, and drove to work in the same 7-year-old car he has been driving since before this milestone was even visible on the horizon. His colleagues did not notice anything different about him that day. His family had no idea it had happened. The barista who made his coffee could not have guessed. The world treated Zayn on his $1 Million Wednesday exactly the way it had treated him on every other Wednesday of his adult life. And what Zayn discovered in the weeks that followed is that this is both the most surprising and most important truth about crossing 7 figures. Not what changes on the outside, but what changes on the inside, and why those two things are almost completely disconnected. This is the honest account of what actually happens when your portfolio hits $1 million. First, what $1 million actually means in 2026. Before getting into the psychology and the relationships and the quiet internal shift, it is worth being precise about what this number represents, because the word millionaire is carrying decades of outdated cultural baggage. $1 million in purchasing power today is not what $1 million represented a generation ago. Adjust for inflation, and today's $1 million portfolio has roughly the purchasing power that $400,000 had in the early 1990s. The mental image most people carry of a millionaire was formed during a period when that number meant something categorically different. Surveys asking Americans what net worth qualifies someone as genuinely wealthy consistently produce answers well above $1 million. The number most Americans associate with real financial comfort sits closer to $2 million, which means Zayn has crossed a significant threshold. He is in roughly the top 3% of American adults by investable assets, while simultaneously falling short of what most people around him would even define as wealthy. Only a small fraction of people with over $1 million in investments describe themselves as wealthy when surveyed directly. The majority call themselves middle class or upper middle class. The man who spent 15 years building toward this number, who sacrificed and contributed and resisted the temptation to spend what he saved, looks at the account and feels something genuine, but it is not the feeling the movies promised. It is quieter than that. More like relief than arrival. Why strangers cannot tell. Zayn works in an office of about 60 people. None of them know. This is not because Zayn is being secretive in any dramatic sense. It is because his $1 million produces no visible signal whatsoever. Research into how human beings actually perceive and respond to wealth reveals something uncomfortable about our species. We do not respond to wealth itself. We respond to signals of wealth. Expensive visible logos on clothing measurably change how strangers evaluate the person wearing them, their perceived status, their authority, their likelihood of having requests complied with. A small embroidered logo on a shirt changes how strangers behave toward a complete stranger in ways that have been documented across multiple studies. But the logo does not make the people perceive the wearer as more trustworthy or more likable or more worth knowing, only more expensive. Strangers grant compliance to wealth signals. They do not grant genuine regard. And Zayn's $1 million sitting inside a brokerage account emits no signal of any kind. His car is practical and paid off. His clothes are unremarkable. His watch tells time without communicating a price point. Every social interaction he has today is identical to the social interaction he would have had at $50,000 or at zero. The world is organized around what people project, not what they hold. And what genuinely wealthy people project, according to decades of research into actual high net worth households, is aggressively ordinary. The most common vehicles among American millionaires are practical domestic and Japanese brands. Half of them have lived in the same house for more than 20 years. They're sending the fewest signals of anyone in the room, while people with significantly less money spend a meaningful portion of their income maintaining the appearance of having more. The BMW in the parking lot is not evidence of financial security. It is frequently evidence of a monthly payment that is quietly preventing financial security from ever arriving.
What happens when you tell someone? Zayn told one person, his older brother, over dinner, during a moment of genuine pride he did not fully think through before acting on. Within 3 weeks, his brother mentioned, casually, almost apologetically, that he was dealing with a difficult situation and wondered whether Zayn might be able to help temporarily. The amount mentioned was not small. Zayn navigated it carefully, declined gently, and the conversation ended without apparent damage. But something had shifted at that dinner table that has not entirely unshifted since. His brother now calculates him differently. Not maliciously, not with bad intent, just differently. Every money conversation they have now carries a subtext that did not exist before that dinner. Research on financial relationships is not encouraging on this point. Studies tracking what happens to relationships after money changes hands between people who care about each other show that the majority of those relationships become measurably less close. The damage is not always dramatic. It does not always look like conflict. Sometimes it just looks like a subtle recalibration in how someone who loves you thinks about your situations relative to theirs. Tall poppy syndrome, a documented psychological pattern in which people report greater discomfort watching a peer exceed them than watching a stranger fail, means that the people most affected by Zayn's success are not strangers. They are the people who watched him at the same starting line, the people who remember when his circumstances were identical to theirs, the people for whom his crossing that line represents an implicit question about their own trajectory that they did not ask and cannot easily answer. The financial independence community has a phrase for the strategy that emerges from all of this research: stealth wealth. It is the practice of building and holding significant assets while maintaining a lifestyle and social presentation indistinguishable from someone with considerably less. It is not deception. It is the rational response to an asymmetry that the data makes very clear. Telling people produces costs. Not telling people produces none. The optimal move at $1 million is quiet. There is a room, though, where Zayn's $1 million does change how people treat him, not because anyone in the room knows about the portfolio, but because of what the portfolio has done to Zayn himself. That room is his office. Approximately 8 months before the Wednesday when his portfolio crossed $1 million, something shifted in how Zayn carried himself professionally. Not dramatically, not in a way he announced or even fully noticed at first, but the financial security accumulating in the background of his life had gradually eroded a specific kind of low-grade professional anxiety that had been present for his entire career. The anxiety of needing this particular job to continue. When you need your job with genuine desperation, when losing it would create a financial crisis within months, that need shapes every professional interaction in ways you cannot fully control. You laugh at things that are not funny because the person who said them has influence over your continued employment. You absorb unreasonable requests because the alternative feels dangerous. You negotiate from the position of someone who cannot afford to hear no, which means the other side of the table can sense your constraint even when you work hard to conceal it. $1 million invested, generating returns that cover a meaningful portion of basic living expenses through what financial planners call the 4% rule, changes this calculation fundamentally. Not because Zayn is ready to retire, but because the worst realistic outcome of any professional conversation is now survivable. He can ask for what he believes is fair and genuinely mean it when he says the alternative is acceptable. He can decline work that conflicts with his values without the declining feeling like a luxury he cannot afford. He can tell the truth in a meeting without running a background calculation about whether the truth will cost him something he cannot absorb. His colleagues and his manager do not know about the portfolio. They simply observe a person who has begun to carry themselves like someone with options. And we instinctively respond to people with options differently, with more respect, more deference, more genuine attention. Zain got treated better professionally. Everyone in his office attributed it to growing confidence and capability. The actual source was a brokerage account nobody knew existed. The money never entered the room. What it sent in its place was a version of Zain who no longer needed the room to go a particular way.
What the research says about the internal shift. There is a body of psychological research examining what wealth, or even just the perception of it, does to behavior and self-perception. Some of it is uncomfortable. Studies using artificially rigged games to create a sense of advantage in participants have found that people who feel wealthier, even in a clearly artificial context, begin behaving differently within minutes. They become louder. They attribute outcomes more heavily to their own skill and less to circumstance. They consume more of shared resources. These findings have had a complicated replication history and should be held carefully rather than treated as settled science. But the directional pattern, that crossing into genuine financial security changes not just your circumstances but your psychology, is consistent across enough independent research to take seriously. For Zain, the shift has felt less like entitlement and more like the gradual removal of a background noise he had stopped noticing precisely because it had been present for so long. The low-grade calculation that runs in the background to financial insecurity, the ongoing assessment of whether you can afford the unexpected thing, whether this month works, whether the plan still holds, consumes cognitive and emotional bandwidth that you do not fully account for until it is gone. When it goes, the space it occupied becomes available for something else. For Zain, it became available for attention, for presence in conversations that used to be partially occupied by background financial arithmetic, for patience with problems that used to feel more urgent than they were. The research on well-being and wealth has been revised meaningfully in recent years. An earlier widely cited finding suggested happiness stopped increasing with income at relatively modest levels. More recent and more methodologically sophisticated work, tracking real-time emotional states across very large samples, finds that well-being continues rising with financial security well beyond those earlier thresholds, with no clear plateau for the majority of people. What the stack buys, more than anything purchasable, is the deletion of a specific category of anxiety that quietly shapes every day it is present. Nobody can see that deletion from the outside. It does not show up in any observable way. It simply makes the days different from the inside. The loneliness nobody mentions. There is a cost to stealth wealth that Zain did not fully anticipate. It is a quiet one, and it compounds slowly. When the people around you are navigating financial stress, rent increases, car repairs that break the budget, the ongoing arithmetic of income that doesn't quite match expenses, and you are no longer navigating those same stresses, a distance opens. Not because anyone is unkind, not because the relationships are damaged, but because you are carrying a reality that does not match the conversation, and participating authentically requires a kind of ongoing improv that gradually becomes its own low-grade effort. Your friend describes a financial worry, and you respond with genuine empathy, while privately knowing your own version of that problem disappeared years ago. Your family discusses financial constraints at gatherings, while you navigate how much of your own reality to bring into the room. The wealth did not create the distance. The necessary silence around it did. And the silence, for all its practical rationality, has a texture that is worth being honest about. People who have navigated this describe it as a decade or more of feeling like they were carrying something real that could not be put down or shared. The rational choice and the comfortable choice are not always the same choice. What the number is actually worth. Zain thinks about this question directly now in a way he did not before he crossed the threshold. $1 million invested at a conservative withdrawal rate generates an income that, while not replacing a full salary, represents a meaningful fraction of median household income produced entirely without labor. The portfolio has become a second contributor to his household, one that does not require his time, does not call in sick, does not need feedback or management or motivation. It runs in the background of his life the way an infrastructure runs in the background of a city, invisibly, reliably, without requiring attention. What that reliability actually purchases is not a lifestyle upgrade. Zane's lifestyle is nearly identical to what it was when his portfolio held a fraction of its current value. What it purchases is the permanent retirement of a specific kind of fear. The fear that an unexpected thing will become a crisis. The fear that a bad quarter at work translates directly into a bad quarter at home. The fear that the plan, whatever the plan is, depends on everything continuing to go reasonably well.
That fear is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply occupies space, every day in every decision, until it does not. The check engine light becoming an errand rather than an emergency. The difficult conversation at work becoming a conversation rather than a calculation. The unexpected expense becoming a line item rather than a disruption.
None of this is visible from the outside. Nobody at the grocery store can see it. The barista cannot see it. Zane's colleagues cannot see it. The world treats him exactly the same, and increasingly he understands that this is not a disappointment, it is the entire design. The reward for building real financial security was never the applause, it was always the quiet. The specific, earned, completely internal quiet of a Tuesday when something goes wrong and the only thing required is to handle it. No calculation, no anxiety, no background noise, just the thing, handled, and then the rest of the day. That is what changes after $1 million invested. Not the world, you. And the you that changes is calmer, clearer, and considerably harder to rattle than the version that existed before the Wednesday morning with the coffee and the number on the screen. If this gave you a clearer picture of what you are actually building towards, hit the like button and subscribe to Wetrix Invest, because next time we're going even deeper into the financial milestones that actually change your life, and that's a conversation worth being here for.